Here is the first part of our lesson. Does this look familiar to you? Yes, because we've talked about it before, right? So if I say f of x is 2x plus 1, and I say g of x is 3x minus 5, could you find f plus g? Could you do it without even writing anything down? What is it? What is f plus g of x? 5x minus 4, right? Could you do f minus g? 2x minus 3x would be negative x. 1 minus negative 5 would be 6. So it would be negative x plus 6, right? Okay, so these are some things that we've talked about before. That is called, do you remember what it's called? It's called operations of functions, right? The basic operations, adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. Those operations with functions, okay? I don't really need to do any more of that, do I? You okay with that? Okay, so here is the first main thing that we really have to talk about today. Let's start off with this. Y equals 2x plus 6. And let's also do this one while we're at it. 2, 1, 3, 6, 4, negative 5, and negative 3, 2. So I've written two functions down for you. The first one is in the form of an equation. It's a linear function. And the second one is in the form of ordered pairs. How do you know that this one is a function, by the way? Do you remember that? Look at the x's. What do you notice about the x's? They're all different. They don't repeat, right? When the x's don't repeat, we know that this is a function. If I graphed them, it would pass the vertical line test. All that kind of vocabulary. Remember using that and talking about that? Okay, so this is another function. It's like we said, it's a linear function. How do you know it's a function? It's something we've talked about many, many times, right? We know by looking at that equation that that's a function. It's not a vertical line, it's a diagonal line, so we know it passes the vertical line test as well. You okay with that? Okay, so inverse functions have many different uses. We're going to talk about them in the next couple days, but we've got to know how to find them first before we can talk about how to use them and things like that. Okay, we're actually going to talk about how to use them here in just a little while. Okay, but to find the inverse function, switch x and y. And that's so important that I'm going to ask you to say it to me. How do you find the inverse of a function? How do you find the inverse of a function? One more time. How do you find the inverse of a function? So how do I find the inverse of this function? So like 1 and 2? Wait, like 6 and 3? It's that easy? 5 and 4? Negative 5 and 4, excuse me. And 2 and negative 3. And that's it. That's the inverse. This is the function. This is the inverse. Now, are they all that easy? They're not, but that's okay. Okay? Because they don't get a whole lot harder. How do I find the inverse of this function? Switch x and y. Okay, if I literally just switch x and y, I have that, right? Correct? Okay, is this in the form that I'm used to seeing an equation of a line in? Now, how would I get it in the correct form? What does it have to be? Then it had to be y equal. So sometimes the initial part of finding the inverse function is switching x and y. Sometimes one more step after that is solve for y. Yeah? So if I'm going to solve for y, how do I go about solving for y? If I want to get this variable right here by itself, how do I solve for that? Okay, let's get rid of the 6 first. X minus 6 equals 2y. Divide everything by 2. So I could leave it as x minus 6 over 2 equals y, or I could say 1/2 x minus 3 equals y, couldn't I? Aren't those both equal? They're the same? Not equal, but equivalent? Yeah? Now, here's the deal. Some people freak out at this. They do not like it at all. Because it's not y equals. It's 1/2 x equals 3, minus 3 equals y. Are you going to be okay that it's not in the quote-unquote right order? I mean, if you need to go ahead and write y equals 1/2 x minus 3, you just go right ahead. That is okay. But it's not required. You can leave it just like that. Okay? So if this is the function, then what is this? It's the inverse. Y equals the square root of x plus 2 minus 1. What if that was my function? How would I find my inverse? How would I find my inverse? Oh, switch x and y, okay. X equals the square root of y plus 2 minus 1. How do I solve for x? Excuse me. How do I solve for y? Okay, get rid of the 1, so I'm going to add 1 to both sides. Do the opposite of it, so I get it moved to the other side of the equation. How do I undo a square root? So I'm going to square this side, which means I have to square this side, don't I? So if I square something that's being square rooted, what do I get? Just what's inside, right? So y plus 2. And on this side, do I have to square this, or can I just leave it x plus 1 squared? Yeah, just leave it. Now the only thing left to do to solve for y is subtract 2. What am I subtracting the 2 from? From that whole thing, right? So I have x plus 1 squared minus 2. So if this is the function, what's this? The inverse. Any questions on how to find an inverse of a function? Okay. Now let me show you how I can prove that these two are inverses of a function. Okay. I'm going to start with that first one we used. Y equals 2x plus 6. And the inverse that we found was y equals 1/2 x minus 3. You okay with that? But we're going to do something different. We're going to call this one f of x, and we're going to call this one g of x. You okay with that? Did you not get a schedule change? I think you did. You're on my roll for 5th period. Why don't you run back to the office real quick and